More info at fullandbloom.com. In today's Full and Bloom Flashback, we revisit an old school Full and Bloom interview I did with photographer Don Adkins on Blackie Lawless joining the band London. In the beginning of all this, I got to meet a great hard rocking band called London. And London was basically this group that included Nikki Sixx, who later went on to Motley Crue, and Lizzie, who later went on to a lot of other groups. I got to know those guys and became friends with them. Back in those days, I got in really good with the clubs. I could always get backstage and hang with the guys, and Nikki and I became friends. So I would be backstage hanging with those guys all the time, and pretty soon I was on their A-list and always invited to their shows. And then I became their photographer. London was an interesting relationship because I got to know Nikki very well. And then London lost their lead singer, a guy named Nigel Benjamin, who had a brief run as lead singer of Mott, which was the Mott the Hoople derivative, and that kind of went nowhere. That's when Nikki says, I found this guy named Blackie Lawless. He's intense looking. He looks like he would fit our image. He's hard-edged. So I met Blackie, who had this, how do I say this aura and image about him. You would meet him and he would come up and say, I'm Blackie. Just this real tough guy look. He seemed real threatening at first, but then you got to know him and he's a real pussycat. Basically, they needed some photos. We went to the studio where they were rehearsing, and I brought my bed sheets, stuff like that, to set up backdrops. This became the photo session of London with Blackie as the lead singer. That was extremely short-lived. Basically, it didn't fit. What you had was they rehearsed, Blackie learned all the London songs, and Blackie was good and interesting, but at the same time, you don't picture Blackie Lawless being this pretty boy with a group that features keyboards and a really finesse type of sound. He was more of a hard-edged, three chords in your face type of guy. Anyways, I went to their one and only show they did at the Starwood, where Blackie was the lead singer. London had these boxes with lights on stage. It was sort of like a Kiss thing, but they had all these flashing light boxes and they would stand inside of them as they were playing, and they would have the London logo in the background. Blackie's up there, and they made him put on like the London glam kind of garb. And he was interesting, and you appreciated Blackie and everything, but it just didn't hang together well. But right after that, they parted ways, and then London went on to evolve and then eventually devolve, with Nikki going in and starting Motley Crue. I'll tell you how that started later, because I was there when they came up with the name. Over the next couple of months, I got to know Blackie. I used to go over to his apartment in Hollywood, and like I said earlier, in the beginning he was like, I'm Blackie. He was all tough and everything, but once you got to know him, he was a really nice guy. After getting to know him, I found out that he was a 90-mile-per-hour pitcher in high school and actually got drafted to go to the farm team for the Detroit Tigers. Then he came to the fork in the road where he was like, okay, do that or go on to rock. He wound up doing a brief stint where he got the once-in-a-lifetime chance to go into the last incarnation of the New York Dolls. Anyhow, I remember going to his apartment in Hollywood, and I would even take my girlfriend of the moment, just for shock value. You'd walk in the door and there's a throne. He had this seedy little Hollywood apartment, and actually he was in a really seedy area, but he always had good taste, more interesting taste. So he has the throne in there, and then his bed would be up on a loft, and you would look up there on the loft, and he would have these mannequins. My girlfriends would all say, Don, what's with that? And I would go, it's just shock value. And then Blackie would look at them as they're shocked and just smile. So a couple of months after the London experience, Blackie said, Don, I have this incredible concept, Circus. I went to these videotapings where he had a group member named Randy Piper, and Randy had a wife at the time named Belle Piper. It was a package deal where you'd be with Randy Piper, you'd be with Blackie, and then Belle would be the actual videographer. So I got invited to this taping. I think it was down in Orange County, in Anaheim, or Garden Grove. It turns out that I was the only photographer to ever shoot this, so I had the shots of Circus. From there, we kind of went our separate ways, and then a year or so later, Blackie has this WASP concept. When WASP emerged, it was the sweet zone of about 81 to 83 when you had Motley Crue starting out, you had WASP, you had all these bands, and it was like, who could do more to get in LA Weekly and Music Connection with the most outrageous show? So you had this incredible thing where you have Blackie becoming known for playing with WASP and throwing raw meat into the audience. The audience would be worked into a frenzy. Then you had Motley Crue, just hard driving, and were absolutely a great band at the time. If you'd like to be notified as new stories and interviews are uploaded, hit the subscribe button and click the bell.